Everyone, welcome to the Imaging Wire show. My name is Jake Fish, and I'm the host of the Imaging Wire and the host of the Imaging Wire show and the editor of the Imaging Wire newsletter. And I'm super excited about today's episode. We have Matthew Fuld from Siemens Healthineers on the show with us today. And Matthew is the product manager for the NAEOTOM Alpha, which is Siemens Photon-counting CT product, which for those of you who are in the CT space or even just paying attention to the modality space for the last say half a year, know that that's a really big deal. It's a milestone type product, and that makes this a milestone type episode. And I'm super happy to be sharing it with you. So without further ado, Matthew, welcome to the show.
Jake, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
All right, it's great to have you once again. Before we jump into all the CT stuff, or actually maybe you can just give a little introduction to yourself and you know what you do at Siemens and what you brought you into that role.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's great to be here with your audience. You know, it's always a fun opportunity to talk about the great things that Siemens is doing, and it's a fun team to be part of. I've been very fortunate to be with Siemens now about a decade. For me, it started in research and development, working with our great research collaborators here in North America, throughout the East Coast, and utilizing my background, which is a PhD in lung imaging, all the way up until the point where I got to run one of our first generation prototypes of photon counting technology back in 2014. So it's been really exciting to be on the R&D side, but in the last 5 years, I've transitioned to explaining our innovative technology to customers and how it really can impact them in clinical practice through our product management organization. And it's exciting to be the product manager for photon counting and the NAEOTOM Alpha here in North America.
It seems like you've been busy this last decade, working your way through the CT side of the organization. And before that, before our meeting, I was looking around your LinkedIn page, and I noticed that while you were receiving your PhD, you also were in the swing dance club. And you're not the first person with a PhD to come on the show, but I'm pretty sure you're the first person who was also involved in swing dancing during their studies. And I'm so curious about that. Tell me about it.
You know, swing dancing is a great homage to the past. Jazz music is phenomenal, but when you learn about swing, really, you know you can just simply move your body to any type of music. So whether it's jazz or hip hop or rap or any music, it just is a way to express yourself and get involved. And fortunately, my girlfriend in college dragged me kicking and screaming to learn how to do swing dancing. I didn't want to go for the first couple of days. I was like, I'm a football player. I'm in a fraternity. I'm not going to be a swing dancer. But after a few weeks, I was the one dragging her because it's just so much fun. It's a great way to meet people. I've danced all over the world. And during my time in graduate school, I worked with a friend, and we started an international festival where we had hundreds of people come from all over the world. So it was a great way to meet people, to go around the world and experience that culture. You know, as you know, language barriers can get in the way, but dancing and music is always there. It was fun. It was aerobic. You know, we could do all sorts of different aspects to it. So it was how I met my wife. I was her swing dance instructor. So I have to say that swing dancing is an extremely important part of my past and history. My wife and I have 2 small kids, so getting out dancing today is harder than we would like it to be, but we always dance in the kitchen whenever possible.
That's so good. So I understand that there's a bit of jumping in swing dancing, and to bring us back to the I guess the reason that we're here, so the photon counting CT, this is also a big jump in CT technology. And in fact, actually, one of the things that cued me into that was the fact that the FDA came out in September and basically said this is the biggest deal in CT in a decade. And what I'm hoping you could share with us is, you know, what makes photon counting such a big deal?
For sure. I mean, just like those leaps and flips that I like to throw people around in swing dancing, the quantum leap in technology that photon counting is for CT really it is a milestone. I mean, we've had a number of big milestones in the history of CT. CT is now 50 years old, which is amazing. October 1st, 1971 was the first CT scan in London, England. But it's marked by a number of huge milestones. And we believe this leap, as the FDA has said, really is going to define CT for the next decade. It's a fundamental shift in the technology of how we measure X-rays. And that will open the doors really to allow us so much more information, so much more detail in an image. It will allow us to have functional information. CT has classically been what you see is what you get, a black and white picture of structure with spectral information that we'll get in every scan at high resolution. With photon counting, it's going to be more than just structure, it'll be function, and really will open the doors for better clinical care for our patients, which in the end is what we want to do. We want to provide the best care to patients by getting the right level of information in every scan and do it with ease and simplicity. And photon counting technology will do that. It's a change. Every CT scanner in the world today is a scintillator. We changed from xenon gas detectors in the 80s, 90s to what we use today, which are scintillators. It's a process where an X-ray hits the detector and makes light, and we measure the light. That's how every CT scanner works from Siemens or any other vendor. Photon counting is different. It's no longer a process where you measure light. An X-ray hits the detector and it deposits energy, and we measure the energy directly. And so with that change fundamentally in how it works, it opens a ton of doors for us to do so many different things.
So I understand that Siemens is, and the NAEOTOM Alpha is not only Siemens' first photon-counting CT, but just the very first clinical photon-counting CT on the market. How did you manage that?
Yeah, it's such an exciting technology, but it's not an easy technology to implement. The idea of wanting to measure every single individual X-ray when it hits the detector is not a new concept. People have been trying to do photon counting for 2 decades or more, but it's how do you do it practically in a CT scanner? We use a lot of X-rays in a conventional CT scan, and to measure each one individually, which is what that means, photon counting, it's because we count every photon, is a challenge for the technology. And it was developing the semiconductor material. What Siemens uses is a cadmium telluride crystal that we had to learn how to grow. We have had 15 years of research and development working with a partner in Japan called Acrorad that we first partnered with 15 years ago to try to see if you could do this type of acquisition at all. Could it be possible? Could you ever do it? It's going to be amazing. In the early 2010s, we didn't know if it was going to work. We had started building the technology, and we got images that I wouldn't want to show any customer, because it was like, wait a minute, that's never going to be a CT scan. Nobody will ever want to do a clinical scan. But spending money into the research and development, into the R&D, we made significant strides. And as I said, I had the privilege of being one of the research scientists with one of our early prototypes. We have had 6 prototype systems out in the field since that 2014 time window, 2 different generations. And that gave us a tremendous amount of experience in preparation for launching the first true clinical product at the end of 2021. So it's really exciting that we were able to get here. We'll see how the rest of the field does. everyone is trying. And like I said, they were trying in the early 2000s as well, and they gave up. Now that they realize that Siemens has gotten to the point where we can do it, they're going to do their best to play catch up as well.
You mentioned just now that you had, I guess, 6 prototype units out in the field. How many units are in the field now?
Yeah, so those were prototypes, right? So those have all come back. Those were really test beds to test the technology, all of the fundamental benefits that you get from photon counting. Today, the real true clinical products, the NAEOTOM Alpha, there are almost 30 systems worldwide. There are 4 of them today in the United States and the rest in Europe. And so it's no longer a prototype. It's no longer that dream of testing the technology to see if it will work. It's in clinical practice in those 30 sites, used every day. And it's the power and the value that photon counting really offers. Really fundamentally, it's a shift in the detectors. It offers the ability to have much higher spatial resolution than we've ever had before. Typically, when you wanted to get a high spatial resolution image, you wanted to look at a coronary plaque, or you wanted to look at an inner ear exam, you had to really raise the radiation dose. You would put filters into the beam to try to take advantage of mechanisms that would boost spatial resolution. But nobody wanted to do that clinically on a routine basis, because nobody wants high radiation dose. Everybody wants a high quality scan, but at low dose. And with photon counting, one of the ways that you end up measuring every photon is by having smaller detector elements. And since there's no more light, as I mentioned, we're able to do that effectively and do it with today's electronics so that we can measure every photon. And so we get much higher spatial resolution. Even our highest end system on the market today, that's a scintillator-based system, a Somatome Force. It's by far the best scanner on the market, other than an NAEOTOM Alpha, but we can even go 50% higher spatial resolution than that without any of dose penalty that you would associate with the UHR comb filter, something that would waste 50% of the dose, even on a Somatome Force. And so getting detail in an image without the penalty of dose really is a remarkable piece of technology. The other aspects of photon counting that really drive the technology forward, there's no more electronic noise. We always think about electronic noise in a system. I've conveyed for years the analogy that we've tried to reduce noise with integrated detector technology. With our stellar detector technology, I use the analogy that a college kid would buy a fancy stereo, but was cheap, and so bought like the paper thin copper wiring. You would get pops and crackles in your sound. When you got a job after school, you had a little bit more money, you realized that you wanted better sound, so you bought better cables. This system has no more cables. There's no more noise. There's no more analogy. We measure the signals. We simply throw everything that is not a valuable signal away. And so no electronic noise in the system means better image quality, means better image quality at low dose, means those ultra high resolution images can be done significantly better without noise. And so fundamental technology with photon counting really offers a tremendous amount. It also makes spectral imaging, which has been the promise of CT in the last 10 years, a reality in every scan. Because we measure the energy of every X-ray, we can now do spectral processing, look at what are the underlying materials, not what is the intensity of the Hounsfield unit values, but what is the material? How much of it in terms of milligrams per milliliter of iodine, for example, is there, but not need a dedicated scan. On every other scanner in the world, you have to choose to do spectral imaging, or you have to choose a spectral acquisition with a certain kind of detector that is compromised based on light. With photon counting, there are no more compromises. You just get the information because you're measuring every X-ray. And so the combination of these factors together is really the draw of photon counting: smaller pixels, higher resolution, no noise from the electronics at all in the image, and spectral information always. And so it's a system where you get all of the benefits without any of the negatives. There's no trade-off of noise versus dose or spectral versus speed. It's the system that we've all been wanting to develop over the last 50 years that gives us that full picture, because then it'll open doors to answer new clinical questions that our users are really after.
So, and you bring up a good point. So when you take all these technological advantages, what does that mean from a clinical side? What are the killer applications, or the ways that it's delivering the most value now?
Yeah, Jake, that's a great question. That's always, people always ask, oh, well, so what now? Now, what do I get from this system? And fundamentally, you have to remember, this is 50 years into CT. And so at some point, CT was really slow. We couldn't scan moving organs. You couldn't scan the heart. You didn't want to scan the whole body because you were limited to a certain coverage. Today, we can scan everything on a modern scanner. And so it's not that there's a new body part instantly that we will be able to scan. It's simply that scanning everything just gets that much better. We get that much more quality, spatial resolution, spectral information, and doing it all while lowering radiation dose for the patients. So we give them the best care with the least amount of harm. And so having the combination of all of these items together simply allows us to do new things. There are certainly new dedicated areas where photon counting will open doors that we couldn't achieve before. There were certain patient groups that were a challenge to scan. You know, an example of that would be a patient with a very high calcium burden. When you wanted to do, say, a coronary CTA exam on that patient, a lot of times they were very difficult to interpret. Calcium is very bright in a traditional CT image. It blows out a blood vessel, makes it hard to read and evaluate. And you know, the goal there is to look through a vessel and see whether or not it's completely patent or not. And if calcium blooms and you can't see through the vessel, then you can't evaluate it appropriately. With this technology, we don't have calcium blooming in the same way. Higher spatial resolution makes the calcium focused. We don't get an effect from a lack of spatial resolution, but because of this all-in-one solution where spectral is built in based on measuring the energy of every X-ray, we can actually take advantage of the properties and create an image with the effect of iodine, but pull calcium out. Normally, when you would try to do that, you would lose all that information. It would degrade. It wouldn't be an image where you would have high enough quality to evaluate a patient. So now patients with a high calcium burden can get the same care as those who don't. So we get high quality coronary CTA exams, even in those high risk patients. And another patient group that has always been a challenge are post-treatment patients. You would put a coronary stent into somebody, a valve, an implant of whatever type, and that implant doesn't behave the same way as normal tissue. It's usually metal or very dense. And when you do that, it's very hard to see around those materials. You know, specifically a stent, whether it's in the leg or in the coronary, oftentimes those devices have issues over time. You want to be able to see clearly into them to evaluate for restenosis, as an example. And with today's technology, it's just not possible. You get artifacts, you get blooming, you don't really have the spatial resolution to do it. And so somebody who had a coronary stent, for example, they would get sent to the cath lab just for a diagnostic exam because you couldn't see inside a stent. Now with photon counting, we have the much higher spatial resolution, the no electronic noise, but we've built it in the NAEOTOM Alpha in a dual source CT, which gives us 66 millisecond temporal resolution at the same time, meaning we stop motion of the heart and have the spatial resolution to see it. There's no other way to do that. We had fast acquisition speed before, but you could never have enough detail in an image to do it. There are other scanners out there in the world that have high detail, but they're very slow. And so it's having that combination that is the killer app. Really, it's the all-in-one scanner that enables all of these additional functionalities. We expect to be able to provide better long-term care to patients. You can think of an oncology patient who comes in. Unfortunately, their journey is not a single visit. It's coming in today. It's coming in 3 months from now, 3 months from then, and we scan them over time. Unfortunately, I have family members who are going through that right now. And when you are in treatment for cancer, you get oftentimes changes in your body. Chemotherapy, for example, oftentimes causes patients to lose weight and then gain weight as they recover. Again, if you look at modern CT technology, they try to give the best quality at the least harm. And so they adapt to patient size, but that adaptation changes what the clinician sees in an image. And so if you are trying to do quantitative medicine where you're tracking changes over time, if the scan technique alters what the physician is looking at, it becomes a big challenge for them to be truly quantitative about here it was at time point 1, time point 2 to 3. It becomes a challenge. Photon counting offers a unique capability in that without electronic noise in the system, with the ability to have spectral information in every scan, independent of how we acquire the data, regardless of the KV that is selected, we can deliver the same monoenergetic image. And that allows us to be independent of scan technique. And that means we'll get better answers overall for our patients. Fundamentally, I see this as the ultimate scanner for pediatric patients. We see dual source CT in general because of the speed, what you need for a pediatric patient, because they move, they don't listen. My 5-year-old and 3-year-old never listen to me, so hopefully you can't hear them in the midst of the interview and screaming. But they're always going to move in a scan, and so we develop dual source to allow us to scan faster than the patient. But sometimes they're really small. They're days old. Their vessels are tiny, and you need the spatial resolution detail that you can only get with photon counting, but at the speed that a dual source CT provides, and at the least amount of harm by having the extremely low radiation dose. So it's that combination of all the features that really is the killer app, because it's just going to make CT better for the future. It's going to drive AI algorithms for the future. We're all looking at how does texture change in an image, and can the computer predict new disease states and new algorithms with better data that we will get with photon counting. We'll be able to feed these algorithms and truly change what's possible for our patients in the future.
For right now, for the radiologists and the technologists who are taking on this new technology and now have to operate it and interpret it, what's the learning curve for them?
It's an important question to ask, right? You don't want to deliver a new technology and make it so overwhelming that you need a PhD to come in and turn all the knobs and buttons. And that's what the technology was when we were doing prototypes. There was MATLAB scripting and complicated things, but we would never want to release a product to do that. And so actually over the last few years, Siemens has released what we call My Exam Companion. And that truly was designed with photon counting in mind, because there are a lot of buttons, there are a lot of knobs that you could turn and change and adjust. And we don't want users thinking about buttons and knobs. We want them thinking about their patient and what do they need to get out of the scan. And so that particular technology takes into context the specifics of the patient, their age, their gender, their body habitus from things like the topogram or our fast 3D camera, as well as clinical questions. Can they hold their breath? What is their creatinine level? And drives to the right clinical protocol with the right settings. Are you doing a screening exam? Do you want functional information? All of these things that a technologist could answer to drive a clinical question. It simplifies workflow. Instead of going to your hospital and having 20 different thoracic protocols, you could have 1 or 2. And those 2 protocols follow a decision tree based on those clinical factors or questions that the technologist can easily answer either on the console or on the tablet at the patient's bedside and drive clinical care. And so it makes operating something as complex as a dual source photon counting CT simple to do. And that's what we've seen. These unique features have been easily adopted by our 30 or so early sites. And really, they're able to push the system to its limits. People have been shocked at how well the technology is working. You always worry that when you deliver a brand new technology, something with such a quantum leap as this, that there's going to be significant hurdles. Yeah, they just have grabbed on with two hands and moved forward. And so it's simplified for the technologist with that protocol management. It makes doing a regular exam simple and easy because it automates all of the image reconstruction. And because it automates all of the image reconstruction, it makes it easier for the reader because you consistently get the same information. You don't get a heterogeneous piece that you're trying to then call down to the CT scanner. Come on, I didn't get this. I need this set of information. It's consistency that they need, and it's quality that the photon counting technology provides, but done in a very simple, easy to use manner. And people are excited to push the technology to its limits.
Understand that this is the biggest leap in CT in the last decade. It really has me thinking about what the next decade is going to bring. And I'd love for you to share what you expect to see.
We're very excited for the last decade. Especially here in North America, the footprint of Siemens CT has drastically grown as our customers have recognized the amazing innovations that we've come across with our workflow technologies, with dual source CT. Now with the introduction of photon counting, it's going to open the doors to even more capability for our customers and for patients. That it's just going to change the landscape, I think, of imaging in general. Today, people have gotten a lot of nuclear medicine studies, SPECT CTs for the workup of cardiac disease. I imagine much of that is going to simply be done by CT. Cardiac guidelines have just been released that tell you to use a coronary CTA for that workup. And what better CT in the world to use than a photon counting CT that has higher spatial resolution, better spectral resolution, allowing you to see past those conventional artifacts of things like calcium blooming. But there's more that could be done, right? We're really only scratching the surface of those initial technical benefits of photon counting, and there's a lot more that we could do. One of the things that we've done over the last 10 years is dual energy imaging, spectral imaging, and we do that with photon counting today, but it offers the possibility of going beyond that as well. The system has 4 thresholds, so you can actually explore the idea of multiple contrast agents simultaneously. Imagine a world where, and in my dream world, because again, my PhD is lung imaging, so everything always to me relates back to the lung, but you can inhale a contrast agent, xenon or krypton. You can inject a contrast agent into the blood vessels, say iodine or gadolinium, or you could tag an inflammatory response or a lesion or a tumor with a, say, gold nanoparticle or bismuth nanoparticle, and you can identify multiple contrast agents simultaneously. That will be spectacular for driving information forward. It's not something that you can do out of the box today. The biggest hurdle is getting those additional contrast agents cleared by the FDA. Today, there are a number of agents in trials with the FDA for release. And so at some point, those contrast technologies will be available. And then using it with a technology like the NAEOTOM Alpha and photon counting will really be very interesting. I mean, imagine if you could characterize multiple aspects in one scan. First of all, you save radiation dose because you're only doing one scan instead of multiple exams. But it's just rich information that we'll be able to feed into algorithms. AI today has been looking at the texture of that black and white CT. But just imagine if it also looked at the color of spectral information and how much more that we can see. I mean, there's a tremendous amount, and I give great respect to radiologists. You know, that they look at images all day and see patterns with their training and can pull out really amazing detail. But I think there's just certain things that a computer is gonna support them with and give them more information and more tools. And so the combination of their experience with AI pulling out detail, you know, is going to be amazing. And so we at Siemens obviously see that future where AI is a core part of medical imaging. And when you feed it better information, like you would do with photon counting, with contrast information, spectral information, it's really an open-ended future of lots of possibilities. So, I mean, today, Siemens has photon counting technology on one scanner. If you think about the history of how we released our integrated detector technology, our stellar detector, that came out on one scanner originally too. That was on the Edge in 2009. It took about 10 years. Every scanner Siemens CT cells has a stellar detector. So you could imagine a future where every CT scanner is a photon counting detector. And I imagine I will see that in my life at Siemens, probably not a tremendous distance in the future because of all of the advantages that you get. Again, higher spatial resolution, no electronic noise, spectral information in every scan, and optimized image contrast. That's just better. Why wouldn't you do it if we could get the technology to the right level where we can scale it and make it cost effective? And that's one of the biggest challenges, and that's why Siemens partnered with Acrorad 15 years ago and purchased them more than a decade ago, because growing the right semiconductor material is the secret sauce to photon counting, and doing it at cost and doing it at scale is what will allow you to make this technology broadly available in the market. And Siemens definitely has a leg up on the competition. There are a number of competitors who are trying to play catch up, people who have bought other crystal growing companies in, say, the last year. So if we do the math, I guess they'll have their first photon counting CT scanner maybe in about 10 years from now, which is fine by me. It's a technology that Siemens is very proud of, and we're happy to continue to be the leaders.
I commend you for all that you've accomplished in the foresight that Siemens had to invest in this back 15 years ago when you did. And I'm really excited to see this future that you're talking about on the, you know, on the clinical side and technology side, and what that might allow in terms of contrast agents and AI and everything else. So I can't wait to see it. And I thank you for coming here and sharing it with me and with the audience. And, you know, what I would say to everybody watching is that if you're performing CT scans all day and there's more information that you could get out of them, or if you're an institution that views yourselves as cutting edge, and you want some technology to back that up, come talk to Matthew and his team. Go check out the NAEOTOM Alpha. Seems like something that's really special. And everybody else, take care until next time. Thanks for coming, Matt.
Thank you. Appreciate it.